lot of the questions that I'm getting from people. Like, we've been a very EOS supportive group, like for really since about September, I think, is when we started to
people are angry and confused, and we know that.
They are, yeah. So I'm going to ask some questions that may come across as contentious, but please know I'm coming at it as somebody who's a concerned fan. Are we live?
Nice.
All right. Thanks for the heads up, Matt. So live on YouTube, correct? All right, cool. Well, to anybody getting to see the background on how this kind of stuff goes down, have a little pre-broadcast chat, and that's the view behind the curtain a little bit. But welcome to Coincast. I'm Kurt Wooker Jr. I'm joined by Steve Floyd from EOS Tribe and Kevin Rose from EOS New York. Both block producers, both having probably very difficult weeks, as they both were expressing. Tired, frustrating. It's just like starting anything up. I've been a business owner my whole life. A lot of people are in this trying to get into cryptocurrency as a career. You understand the nightmare that is, first of all, the bear market of the last 6 months, and second of all, trying to be a developer or to run multiple things at once makes for all kinds of interesting stuff. So we're going to be talking about some of what's going on in the EOS ecosystem, and I want to thank you guys for joining me live on YouTube and in our Facebook group. So
one thing to start off with what you just said is, our week probably pales in comparison to the average token holder, because Steve and I have been doing this for so long. We know where the information is located. We know how to find what is accurate, and we can parse that between what's false. If you're an average token holder that hasn't been living this day in and day out, you'd be looking at this going, what is going on? So we're very happy to be here to answer questions as directly as we possibly can to dispel some of the misinformation.
Absolutely.
Cool. So let's start with like a steelman version of this. I'd like both of your answers on this. What's the 1 minute version? What is EOS in your words? Like, what does it mean to the world?
I'll tell you, Sergey started right off the bat and called it the enterprise operating system. And it has evolved into many other things. There was a marketing group, me and Kevin, an EOS marketing group that we all kind of collaborated on trying to come up with different messaging. But it's evolved to mean a lot of different things to different people. But I think that it's important that token holders and the Bitcoin purists, I was just on a Richard Hart show trying to expound this, is that, this is a mix of centralization and decentralization. It's a trade-off. It is very much an intentional trade-off. As many have said, as Thomas have said, as I have said, you can't have $100 million hacked and code as law to an enterprise company. No one is going to build on this or adopt this as long as we keep that narrative of this purist view. So it is a governed permission blockchain. It is intended to be safe for both token holders, for businesses to build on, and there's some type of recourse if they obviously have their tokens stolen. So it's just kind of an evolution of a public permission chain. So it is permission, but it's a public chain. And this is weird for the Hyperledger people, and it's weird for the Bitcoin purists. It's an experiment. We don't claim that it's perfect. We openly look for feedback. Kevin will say the same, that we are trying to make this thing better and provide a middle ground where businesses can thrive and be protected and be safe. Account recovery. You guys know all the features that have been rolling out. And if you don't, look more into it, and I think it'll make more sense. I'll let Kevin extend on that.
Sure.
So for me, when I first discovered EOS for myself back in last year, it stood out as the first blockchain that would survive contact with mass adoption. That every other use case to that point was trying to iterate on this technology, but was falling short in its usability, scalability, and governance. I think those are three design goals of EOS, and what we're witnessing now are the growing pains. We're a week live, while we start to take these ideas that we've been talking about for 6-7 months to a year, and say, well, how do they actually work now? Arbitration is seeing in real time the things that are working and not working. Block producers are seeing now feedback from votes of what's working and what's not working. So, but for me, EOS is a blockchain that aims to be usable, as in the average person may not even know that they're interacting with the blockchain in the future. Right now, it's difficult. Scalable. in that it can support enterprise decentralized applications, and governed in that it's not the law of the jungle. It's one that respects
code is law.
Right. It's one that respects life, liberty, and property. So that's EOS to me.
Sure.
You can tell Kev's a comms guy. Eloquent answer.
Sure. No, you know what? And both are beautiful for different reasons, you know, and that's what I was hoping to get is like, I have so many people saying like, well, what is EOS? Is it Ethereum or something? You know, that kind of, it's like, yeah, kinda, but that's a stretch, you know, and then
we actually both kind of glossed over what it actually is, which is a platform for decentralized applications. That is what it is.
Right.
That's what it's intended for. Yes.
And then how does it differentiate itself from, you know, you get these people who, like, when you hear the 30,000 foot view version of EOS, like, what is the difference between EOS and, say, you know, Arc or Lisk or any of these other platforms that exist to be an operating system for dApps to run? Is there some magnitude of greatness difference that EOS does?
The governance layer.
Other things?
Yeah, the governance layer would be, you know, the arbitration and governance layer would be a key differentiator. In those other systems, they may provide scalability like Craxel. That's just come out all the way to, just like you said, Arc and some of the other ones. But if you start to look at how they handle governance and arbitration, there's really no recourse if your tokens are lost or stolen. And you also have to understand, I think there was a big concern, you know, about, our accounts get stolen or frozen after 3 years. You can't hodl on EOS. That's a misnomer, because you have to understand that in a system where tokens are bandwidth, if you allowed millions of tokens to get tied up because someone died or someone got put in jail or any number of things happen, that doesn't mean they can't go through arbitration and say, hey, I got arrested for some stupid crap. Like, you know, let me get my tokens back. There's still a forum to go through to say, our bad. Let's get you that back. It goes both ways. So that's about account. That's about the account being delinquent, you know, basically squatting and taking up bandwidth on the network. And it's a balance of that. So I think people need to, when they hear that, understand it's not perfect. And I know that's probably the number one concern right now when they heard that on Richard's show and people, you know, say that, they're like, whoa, what? And it's like, it's not that simple. Like, there's a lot at play there. And that is also something that is looked at being adjusted in the, in the referendum contract for the Constitution. So I'll let Kevin expand more on that area, but I want
to make sure that, and Steve, you're touching on a lot of like details that we're living in every day. So I want to make sure that the background of that
audience understands.
Right. Going back to the original question, I think that where EOS is open source, all of these blockchains are open source, and we will start to share the best tech from each. And as we move forward with this open source society, what will distinguish ourselves from one another will be our governance. And a few years ago, scalability was not an issue. Now you see everybody talking about scalability, and then absolutely nobody was talking about governance. And now you have Ethereum having closed door governance meetings. And Ethereum is not a new platform, it is. It's funny to say that, but EOS is a new platform. We've had it live for a week. But in Ethereum, when you have those closed door meetings in an arguably more mature platform, how is that a participatory governance where the token holders have no say? Even when they did the DAO fork, they forked that despite the hash power voting to not do that. So governance is going to become very important, and we are going to experience some growing pains on EOS as we figure that out, because we need to find this balance between getting things done and then putting them out there to be approved versus being as inclusive as possible of every single possible opinion and stagnating the rate at which we can achieve our goals. It's a middle ground, like Steve was mentioning before.
Sure. So I've got a little bit of a multi-part question follow-up there. Like with arbitration and a constitution and all this kind of stuff, like what's to stop the formation of political parties essentially in the EOS ecosystem?
You could certainly see that starting to happen already. I mean, there's ANCAP leaning people that just want complete, anarchy, and then there's a lot of libertarian types that want, to watch the monetary supply very closely and make sure that everyone has an even voice, no masters. And then there's more centrist. I would say that like me and Kevin are more of a better example of kind of middle of the aisle libertarians. We're not extremists. We try to hear all voices, from the space and just try to make and I've learned a lot from them even in terms of how to handle those voices, because you can certainly have that middle view, but then you also have to communicate that in a way that is not divisive to all people involved. And it's very, very, it's just like any traditional form of politics. So I think you'll certainly see some of that emerge in the coming months and weeks and years. So Kevin,
Kevin, what are your thoughts?
There's absolutely nothing stopping anyone from forming parties. We actually have built in, there are features built in the software that facilitate that through proxy voting. Which I think should be encouraged. I mean, we're creating a community. It's not a libertarian community, although many people are. We're creating a community that allows people to have control over how it's run. You absolutely should look within this community and say, I have some ideas. Does anybody else have these ideas? Oh, can we get together and talk about these ideas some more and see if we can be the change you want to see, kind of thing. I absolutely think it should happen.
And I was just giving an example of that in practice, that you will see proxies. Certainly, I fully agree with Kevin that you'll see a lot of proxies who represent a particular view of the direction that the change should go. And people are going to support those proxies, those parties by default. So
proxies is, proxies is something no one's really discussed yet. That's going. You're basically going.
Delegates, proxies. I mean, whatever. They're interchangeable. Delegates or proxies. People get confused by that word for the token holders and the people out there. If you hear delegate or a proxy, they're essentially the same thing. So
maybe we can move on. But one thing I will say is proxies. Yeah, you delegate your voting power to them, and then they vote on your behalf. We had a phone call with a proxy. And I was like, how do we do this? How do we do this in a way that's like transparent? That's, I don't want to be accused of any wrongdoing. So I just said, I got on the call and said, we're going to record this whole call. If you do not want to record this call, we will not have this call. And so we recorded the call so that we can release those at a later date. We're going to need to figure out how block producers engage proxies in a very transparent and legal way. That's a whole nother discussion.
Yeah.
And that's the people out there need to understand, like, rather than, if you're a token holder, rather than like creating more negative discourse, get involved, like go to the groups and actually say your worst criticism to the main block producers that you're seeing. And you'd be very surprised how much that actually gets factored into the voice of what we're trying to represent and bring to the table. It's a liquid democracy. It really is. I mean, you yourself as a token holder is really mad about something, actually could go to Kevin all the way down to a supporting node like us at EOS Tribe and really get heard a lot more than you would probably realize. So it's a very interesting experiment, but we don't claim that it's perfect for a week out. You know what I mean? So.
Right. Well, and that leads to my next part of the question is, like, when historians like look back at the generation of the founding fathers, there's obviously political motivations there too. And it's like, well, what did Thomas Jefferson do when, like, that kind of thing? And so, like, I know
we're dealing with these types of behavioral and economic models, though. This is something completely different.
There's a very serious detail that I want to make sure that is known. The phrase "launched by the community" is an incredibly powerful one, and I think it's underestimated exactly what that means. Block One, the mass media thought that this is Block One software. EOS is a company. It is not a company. This was launched by the community, and that community, which is Steve, myself, and over 150 block producers, block producer candidates, and token holders, and every interested party, we inherited the expectation that when the software is done, we would launch it. And that expectation, led us to launch it in the way that we did. We had been working on this for so long, but there was one very important feature that we're building now that would have been much better to have a week ago, and that's the ability to solicit token holder opinion on chain to vote on things to do.
Sure.
That tool doesn't exist, and until that tool does exist, there's nothing we can do. So that's the top priority for block producers right now.
The technology's there. I mean, it's there.
Right.
There's Fuzzy's working on a poll system that connects to Steemit. Ideally, it would be connected to EOS. Absolutely. So those are things that many people are talking about and working on currently. Like he said, we probably would have been well served to have that. So at least those people would be able to be funneled in and be heard, and it's kind of empirical. It's on the chain.
Right. Well, and what I'm trying to say is, like, EOS strikes me as something that, much like the United States, really is an experiment in libertarian governance, right? Like the founders, I don't think the founders of the country necessarily thought of themselves as like, wow, I'm going to be famous. I think they probably mostly thought they were going to be hanged. And
pretty much.
And when you look
we feel similar sometimes,
right? But looking back, it's like it's really relevant what a Patrick Henry or a Samuel Adams or whatever had to say about why things went the way they did. And I think in a lot of ways, you guys are going to be in the same situation. If we look back, let's say the whole world runs on EOS in a generation, they're going to look back and say, well, what was Steve's opinion or what, like, how did he respond to this challenge before the Constitution was ratified and that kind of thing, So I was just wondering if that's a conversation you guys have, like, how do you treat it? A lot
of us, like, I want to say this up front, like, a lot of us are actually, like, if you knew us, we're background guys. We're the dudes, like, for me and Kevin running the campaigns. We're not the, like, rock star social media outreach person necessarily. We're humble, like Ron Paul, like, humble servants that really don't want the limelight. Like, you go through all these guys, there's a few that want it, but 99% of these guys, like, are the last people to be in this position. We just want to see a better system than we're getting right now, from our own governments. And that's what's actually brought us all together is we're like, wow, we really see the potential of this in years to come. And we're doing it, a lot of us selflessly, to try to create operations and frameworks to facilitate a better dialogue with the public and to expedite this type of freedom that we have in America and the process to the developing and underdeveloped world. You know what I mean? There's a lot of different components to it. It's not just like one reason. There's a lot of overlapping reasons that brought us here, but a lot of them tend to center around just trying to make a more fair, equitable system, that we can all kind of take part in and create these little microeconomies that we see as the future in our generation. Gen Xers and millennials definitely see this is the future. One version, one flavor of this is kind of where it's going. We don't know that it's going to be EOS. You know what I mean? We're just trying to move that innovation forward and take part in it because it's something we're all passionate about. So,
sure. I have a question for EOS New York was one of the few that stood out. There were the 7 accounts that were frozen by the arbitration wing. And all the reporting said specifically that EOS New York was reluctant to make that freeze because the Constitution hadn't been ratified, and therefore the arbitration wing, it wasn't crystal clear that authority actually existed yet, but ultimately then voted to indeed freeze those accounts. I think that's the kind of thing that I'm kind of trying to hint at, is that, like, in these times of like revolution or in these times of startup, sometimes you have to make decisions that are perhaps unclear to the people initially. But what are your thoughts on establishing that as the culture? Like, well, if it's not all the way decided, but I'm acting.
We're not doing that again. We're not doing it again. That call was
a once in a lifetime deal. I mean, that
was 3 hours long. It was a 3-hour call.
Yeah.
And at one point, Rick, the co-founder of EOS New York, said, "Are you out of your minds?" And the call wasn't everybody versus us. It wasn't like that. I mean, people were going back and forth. If anybody wants to see EOS New York's full opinion, we wrote it in painstaking detail. That's available on our Steemit at EOS New York. And the CoinDesk article that you're referencing that said we were reluctant was with Brady Dale, whom we sent that statement to directly, and said, if you have any questions for us, here you go. They're all answered by that. Right. The way that went down was, in the beginning we had EOS 911. All this evidence was being compiled from people who had had their keys exposed. Okay. And when we got on one of the block producer calls, like when, we've been doing these block producer calls, which are now always recorded and live streamed, and in the future we probably won't need to do them because we will just vote how we want to act, and it's all on chain. We don't need to get together and discuss about it. That's kind of the antithesis of what we're all doing. But when it first came up, what we're going to do about EOS 911, I spoke up on that call, and the head of ECAP was on that call, and I said, we are going to ask you to review the merits of a case as quickly as possible. That's the request we're making to you right now. Mm-hmm. So we compiled all the evidence, or actually, when I say we, I mean it was EOS 42 and EOS Rio who had developed the smart contract that allowed people to prove that they were the owners of the corresponding ERC-20 balances.
Right.
They sent the evidence, and what we got back from ECAF was not there is or there is not enough evidence to grant a temporary freeze. They said, we cannot rule. And at this point, we find this out the day that the unstaking periods for these accounts were going to end. So
I have a different take on this, though. This has bothered me, like Kevin, that sometimes everyone's trying to play politics so much that they don't take decisive strategic action. It would have been much better. No. It would have been much better and saved us a lot of bad PR to actually just go give those tokens to the token holders, because it would have been and then avoided even going through that process, because the argument was, well,
we can give the tokens to the token holders.
The actual people who had been robbed to actually, rather than freeze those accounts, if the hackers took off with them, compensate out of your own inflation those token holders and avoid arbitrating against yourself altogether by overstepping your, as a BP. That's a tough decision because ECAF wasn't in place yet. So
that was also discussed on the call. But the point of what I'm trying to say is that what we were trying to establish on that call was, what is the spirit of the system of governance that we have been working on for 6+ months, and is what we're trying to do in the spirit of that governance? And we were pleading with ECAF to just, we understand that this is a constitutional gray period. Everything that we're doing right now is a gray period until we have a referendum contract. But if we are at least trying to follow the spirit of what we've been trying to accomplish, the thing that we've sold everybody on when they come into the Telegram channels and say, how would this work? How would this work? And people start to stand up and say, I'm trying to be a block producer and be a champion of this, and this is what I believe the system will look like. That's what we were trying to do. Follow that idea that the token holders had been sold on, that there would be process, that we would not do any of the multi-sig powers that block producers have, which 15 out of 21, it's a multi-sig contract to do any of this stuff.
To even freeze anything. Yeah.
Well, with the freeze specifically, it's 21. You need all 21 to implement this blacklist. Otherwise, the next block producer, if they do not have this blacklist, they will process They will process the transactions of whoever it was.
It's important you explain that, Kevin, because a lot of people think that you individually as a block producer have the power, as a producing node, have the power to actually freeze anything. You have to actually have a consensus among the top 21 to do that, and then it has to be brought by arbitration. There's a process that Kevin from EOS New York cannot freeze your transaction and delete. If he does, he'll get thrown out. Literally, you get voted out. Yeah.
And we've all spent extremely too much time and invested too much money and put so much on the line to abuse anything. I mean, we talk about aligning incentives and like there's much at stake to dissuade a block producer from doing that. Steve and I are perfect examples because this is our livelihood. We're not trying to screw it up. But the end of, I just want to finish like what happened. When they decided to, on the call, one of the arguments on the call was that if block producers fail to act, it is an abdication of responsibility to protect property on the chain. And my response to that was absolutely not. What we are witnessing is an abdication of responsibility on behalf of ECAF in following the spirit of governance that we were trying to set up. So what we eventually did was choose to protect property rather than choose to do nothing and allow it to be destroyed.
Right.
And it unfortunately, in the same breath, sets this precedent that we can do whatever we want. And that's why we had some buyer's remorse the next day at EOS New York. It just said,
for sure, yeah.
What did we just do? We cannot generate this perception in the community that block producers can do whatever they want for whatever reason. So we put out that statement. We contacted ECAP directly, and we said, you have 24 hours to rule on it, or we will decide to remove the freeze for you, because we will not sustain extrajudicial action for an indeterminate amount of time.
Right. Yep. How is ECAP selected? Like, who are those people or nodes or groups of nodes or whatever they are? Like, who is ECAP
nodes,
and how?
They're individual arbitrators that are basically selected by the community, and then also by block producers. So you can choose to have your own arbitrator in your region or area that may be someone that you trust more than some international arbitrator. But if you do not have one, they will select one for you.
Block producers do not choose arbitrators. If you're talking about if you were actually going through with arbitration,
case, yes. So you can choose an arbitrator to speak on your behalf. So
basically, when you enter into arbitration, you need to agree. The two parties need to agree on the arbitrator. That's you're consenting to who the arbitrator is.
Sure.
But
there's two sides to that. There's your arbitrator, and then there's the arbitrator at ECAF who is investigating a particular case. So
I don't know. I think what I mean is you consent on the arbitrators. It's not, an arbitrator doesn't represent you. That would be a lawyer. But I think what your question was, how are they selected in the first place as part of ECAP, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, like and how often would they, cycle out? Are they voted? Do they have a term? Like that kind of thing?
Here's the exact process right now. For ECAF, it is directly mentioned in the interim constitution. So that is where the authority flows from. That arbitration is the process for dispute resolution. ECAF is directly named in the next sentence on the Constitution. So therefore, ECAF is the current arbitration forum to handle dispute resolution. The way that those arbitrators are chosen is right now it's a very unofficial process. So nominated in a Telegram channel with this big list of nominations, and then chosen by the head of ECAF right now, which is Moti Tabulo, and you can see his pedigree and information on the EOS Go disclosure that they made. But all these things that I'm saying, if you're listening and you're probably thinking, well, who the hell would know to go look at any of that? And you're absolutely right. That's ridiculous. So we're hoping that ECAF can hire a comms person or do something, because they need to. So what we started to do today at EOS New York is we're going to take articles from that they're posting on the forum, dig them up and post them on our thing verbatim. Go read it. Like, people need to know this stuff.
Right.
And we will probably republish that or put something out similar ourselves, because we say that to all block producers right now. If you have, everyone's looking at us. So some of this critical information, like right now, if New York or some competing BP publishes it, but it's critical, just republish it to your audience. Like, make sure that they know. They don't care about citation. Just get the information out, like, now. Voter education is so important to quelling a lot of this FUD. Right. So it's so critical.
Well, and that's what's interesting too. Like, when it comes to like government now, like a giant complaint is like, yeah, I understand it's a representative democracy we live in, and EOS is also essentially that, experiment in a perfect democracy. But like, knowing how to interface, like, how do I actually get a hold of, my representative or all this different stuff?
For ECAF, there's no really good way right now. And another question that you brought up is equally as important as how they are elected is how do you get rid of them? How would you eject an arbitrator or arbitration forum that is not doing a good job? And right now, I think we're going to work. This is EOS New York's position, but we want to move toward a free market justice system. We want to work toward free market arbitration, where we have many arbitration forums. They are self-funded. They are for profit or nonprofit, not for profit. I don't care. They can figure out how to pay for themselves. But we hope that ECAF is able to organize quickly enough that they can survive. And also, we want to put out the message to everybody else out there. If you want to start an arbitration forum, do some research, start one, read what arbitration is about. If you're a lawyer, a litigator, or something, you have that kind of background, absolutely. There should be competing arbitration forums.
Sure.
And in that way, you can eject corrupt or poor performing arbitrators or arbitration forums simply by choosing to use another one.
Right. So are you saying someone, let's say a group of lawyers came together, they were EOS fans, and they were to form a competing body with ECAP that people could vote to then use the other body rather than ECAP? Is that the case?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we wouldn't be voting there's no on high arbitration forum.
Okay.
There's the Constitution, which we will vote on, but if you have a problem, if I have a problem and I need to file a claim for dispute resolution, I would go to an arbitration forum. I don't need to consult anybody's opinion on that. Okay. So the goal is to have more than one that compete on the backs of their reputation and are self-funded. And have all the normal free market forces that block producers have on ourselves. They've invested in themselves. They put in the time. They have skin in the game, so that they also have those same incentives aligned as everybody else does in this system to see things succeed and to see the value of the token increase and the value of the network increase.
Right.
So that's what we hope to do. And so what we're going to start working on is what defines an arbitration forum, because currently I don't believe that the Constitution does. And of course, none of this matters until we have a referendum contract. And so you see where this is going. This is a grand experiment.
And conveniently, Block 1 has not shipped a referendum contract. So the community, and this is a perfect example about the power of the community in EOS, is working on one aggressively right as we speak. I'm actually working on the interface for that myself. So, that's pull the ABI, develop the inputs, and just push that thing out, whether or not Block 1's going to do it or not. And if everybody votes on it, the block producers will support it. That's what's great, is I think the token holders have this perception that Block 1 is the choke point. That if they don't agree with something, then they may be aligned with these other nefarious elements or something that people don't agree with. That's been a lot of the FUD. Like, they're aligned with these guys. They've got all these tokens, and working, around and with, Block 1 and the launch and their support of just the software. It's very clear that it is in their best interest to make sure that this thing works. I mean, they have a lot of money tied up in it. And if you have those perceptions, it is just not accurate. Understand, people are leaving Block 1 just to service the ecosystem, to be able to play those roles, and sacrificing a lot of opportunity for themselves to really help the community. So you just need to understand that there's people deeply invested in trying to make sure this thing works. But like Kevin said, it's not perfect. There's going to be holdups sometimes and priorities of both those organizations and people in the community, and we're all human. We only have so many hours in a day. So we would have liked to have had a better framework for ECAP. We would have liked to have had the referendum contract in place, meaning, a way to actually go post these complaints, in a forum to actually organize and funnel everyone into a voting mechanism that would allow this stuff to get traction much faster and voices to be heard. But that's, it's the first publicly launched blockchain in this way ever in history. Right. And it's the first, at this level of sophistication, governance layer that we've ever seen on chain. So I think that the token holders out there, just if they see the price go down $2 or $3, they see the price go up $2 or $3, I think things will be okay. You know what I mean? There's at least 30 something dApps that we know of that are launching in the next 30 to 60 days. There's people already, and some of them are big dApps that everyone's been waiting for. Everipedia, we know the names. Right. You've seen our infographic. We tried to share that to, during the mainnet launch, we put that out when we did, because to quell people's perceptions. And, we're not going to be able to convert the purist. I mean, some people are just going to stay code as law, are going to stay the way that they are, as those very chains start to actually copy what we're doing. Right. So keep that in mind, that this system, if there's something that you don't like, you can change it with a smart contract. Right. I mean, literally, it's interchangeable. So I would tell the token holders to just have some patience, you know what I mean, with the process. Give us another 30 to 60 days to make sure. And there's organizations like EOS New York, ourselves, EOS 42, and many of the top block producers, and even some that aren't. Some of the people who are just supporting those, like ourselves, that are still putting in a lot of work to make sure that this thing, works. So if we're a year out, and we're still talking about referendum contracts, well, certainly I could understand, but I seriously doubt that's going to be the case.
Well, let's say it was a year out and like you just kind of can't get this sort of thing taken care of. Like, is there a point at which, you guys walk away or maybe fork the chain or something and just say, hey, guys,
people talk about that. Dan's talked about that many times, side chains and other fork chains that just aggressively.
Wait. I want to clarify. Let's clarify that question. Can you ask that again? A year. So, if we don't have a referendum contract in a year, what do we do?
Yeah, or like let's say you just can't kind of settle the Constitution
all of this
stuff and the arbitration stuff. Yeah, if it just stays political and stays kind of
stagnant.
And everybody's
we did the block producer part. I mean, that was that's a very complex part for arbitrate. I think arbitration should mirror the way that we select block producers somewhat. Because right now, so for a block producer, you have to register, reg producer. You have a username. People go in and search your account ID, your username, and they vote for you. There's no reg arbitrator, Ricardian contract. So that's something I want to see. That's something I want to work on and propose to the community and say what else should be out there. And for those of you who don't know, a Ricardian contract is basically both a human and machine readable contract that is associated with every smart contract. So you have reg producer that will actually do the code and computations to elect block producers based on the software. But there's also a list of agreements that says, I, EOS New York, will promise to do this and promise to not do this. So we need a reg arbitrator contract so that new arbitration forms can show up. Because right now, going back to what I said earlier, there's nothing in the Constitution that really defines what an arbitration form is. Right. So how are we going to have more than one?
And that's a serious attack surface. Like if you think about it, there's a lot of gamesmanship that could go on there, and by holding them to an agreement that's bound to the Constitution would probably keep a lot of wild west stuff going on. People have brought this up. You could become an arbitrator and then basically go and claim a case that isn't really there, or collude with others to claim that tokens were stolen that weren't, and all kinds of stuff. So I completely agree with Kevin that binding that to an actual system level contract is a great idea.
Right. Cool. All right, let's change gears a little bit. One of the other things that's come up quite a bit is the nature of nefarious block producers kind of jumping in. A lot of people have said, a lot of people don't trust Bitfinex, and Bitfinex has said, hey, we want to be a block producer. We're going to use our client EOS holdings to, put ourselves in a power position.
It's a super political topic, man. I mean, you have to understand, people in the top 21 don't want to rock the boat. Right. And you won't see them as vocal because they, of course, would prefer favor. Others have said this. They would prefer not to be in a bad light with those people. Me being a supporting node, people in the community have seen me coming out about exchanges, the historical history of exchanges and delegated proof of stake systems to gain the worker proposal and the actual inflation on the network by basically propping up many fake nodes to try to skim off that no one knows who they are. It's not necessarily Bitfinex. That's just who's in this line of sight because they have a lot of bad press out in the West.
Right.
Does that actually have teeth? I mean, well, let's look at the history of the United States and how aggressive we can be about that kind of stuff. We're not always, our regulators are not always in the right. They tend to overregulate. So it's not so much Bitfinex. I think that people have painted it that way. It's just this idea that certainly large, exchanges could manipulate and use their stake through proxy or otherwise to manipulate themselves and other nodes up. Well, that in and of itself isn't even that bad. But then through taking and staking all that inflation they gain, then they could turn around and use all of that through their exchange stake, through all their users, through all that they've collected over the network over a year or two, to basically just vote in $1 million a day. 4% of the inflation goes to worker proposals. We're talking about there's already $8 million, $9 million in that saving EOS.saving contract in the system right now, and that's one of the initiatives I'm working on. So if you looked at me and Kevin, he's flanking over on the ARB stuff, and I'm over in the worker proposals trying to make sure that these systems don't get gamed, and there is some level of recourse or some counterbalance, but it's not so much. It's not as easy as just pointing to an exchange. It's just that that is potentially, if you look at YUMBI and its history with voting worker proposals for its own self-interest and bit shares, there's a lot of history of this. So I think that people who are in those ecosystems can totally, thank you, Steve, but it's deeper than that. It's like, this is our first chance to get mainstream adoption with a blockchain, to have transparency, to have all the things in the system that we've been talking about for a decade. And now we're at this inflection point. And are we going to, continue to allow that type of gamesmanship to happen, or are we going to, do something about it and come together and actually try to put maybe vote weighting in place so people can't do that, or having proxy rules or something. And it's just trying to open up that dialogue, and they're getting used as the example. So to be fair to Bitfinex, they're the #1 block producer at the same time that people, talk down about them because of the bad press in the West. They're providing major liquidity for the market. And a lot of where we're at in crypto now for the last 4 years could be attributed to a lot of their contributions and the way
I agree.
Investors around them. So it's easy to point the finger and all this, this darkness around them and this, that, and the other. Let's substantiate these claims. Let's go by empirical evidence, and let's make pragmatic decisions that are in the best interest of the token holders and for the liquidity that these exchanges provide. So that would be my diplomatic answer. But also with that, I feel what token holders are thinking and feeling. I mean, we can certainly see there could be wrongdoing there, further down the road. So.
Right. Well, what are your thoughts about Genesis Mining announced that they intend to be, or they are, a block producer, and then we have
my concern is the culture.
They are.
That's the #1 problem, is that you have independent block producers like us that may be a little idealistic, but we have startup backgrounds and consummate. I mean, these are some of the sharpest guys that we've seen in crypto ever. You know what I'm saying? That we are taking this very seriously. We have a path to adoption. We have very pragmatic plans as experienced entrepreneurs and operators. And then you take that and that passion and that independent drive and culture aligned with the interests of the network, and then you supplant it and you put in this mining culture that as an exchange or say a mining operation, their main business is making money. And they put in less technical people to help operate those top positions, and they're apathetic. They don't.
I want to help.
Kevin, I'd like to get your feedback on that whole response.
Well, I want to try to help articulate the difference in culture that Steve was talking about, because I think that there is a difference or at least in the perspective that a mining group approaches its job and the way a block producer does. It is entirely different. So a miner is trying to extract value from the network while providing a service, and a block producer is trying to add value back into the network, because we are in a constant race to do the most good and merchandise that good back to the token holder body to then be elected. So we have every incentive to just take money, and top 21 block producers are making a lot of money, put it back into the network and be transparent about it. You can't go to the top miners in the world and say, "Oh, what'd you do with all that money you made? Did you go back and build? Did you hire Bitcoin devs and pay them, or maybe they did? I don't actually know." But so there's that difference in culture. Going back to exchanges, you used the word malicious when you were describing the malicious block producers entering, and then we said exchanges. We've only been doing this for a week, and so we do need to define what malicious is and whether or not they are being malicious. I think that there is damage being done by block producers who are propped up into the 21 without the token holder consent. Or when I mean that as, if you look at Genesis Mining, they have fewer than 500 accounts voting for them. EOS New York has the 4th largest amount of accounts voting for them. So that's a difference of about 6,000 accounts. And there are others that have even fewer that are way up there. So is that malicious? Maybe, because they're actually taking away block rewards from groups who have been adding a lot of value in educating people, building tools, dev tools, portals, voting portals, wallets, etc. So there's an argument to be made there, but we are only a week in. So
sure. Yeah, and I don't mean to use, malicious or nefarious, necessarily. I just mean in theory. You look at any opportunity. I come from a political science background in college and stuff. So for me, it's always like, I don't know, was that a silent coup and everybody got it jammed down their throats? That kind of thing. So I'm actually been very vocally pro Bitfinex in general. I don't think there's teeth to the Tether FUD and all of that. So I think a lot of it is a lot of fear. I think it's a lot of amateurs who feel bullied in a bad market and looking for a scapegoat personally.
It was Dan Larimer's opinion that exchanges would be great block producers. So I was going back reading I was listening to some of his videos yesterday to just do like some refresher from these like foundational ideas that led us here. And he said that, and I was like, oh, well, that's, different.
It's interesting
than what people have been saying. But I'm not saying it's either way. I'm saying
right. Well, right. It might be. They might be the bad guy. I don't know. So
I mean, like I said, let's look at empirical evidence. Like, let's go by facts and like what they contribute, and get out a little further before people start to make those assumptions. I think that certainly having a dialogue and holding them accountable to the Reg Producer Agreement and all that stuff is certainly pertinent. But I don't think people should really take it much further than that at this time. Like, let's get more evidence.
One thing I want to add is exchanges are just a category, and really what it boils down to is. And I'll just speak for EOS New York for a second. EOS New York is an independent company, and we have nothing else. Like this is the four people that we named in our disclosure. Those are the owners of the company. Our block producer node is the lifeblood of EOS New York. So we live and die by where we are on the ranking every day. And I wake up and I check it. For anyone else, the block producer is a profit center within a larger business, where the larger business has diversified its interests enough that it can continue to live despite its block producing node dying. So there is a difference in the driving forces behind the people operating that.
Sure.
That's something important to keep in mind. That doesn't assume nefarious behavior. We just need to remember alignment of incentives and motivations.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was trying to explain. That's kind of what I was trying to explain is that, a guy who is basically hired by Bitfinex to be on a call. Kevin's waking up. He's at 7 a.m. UTC, New York time. We're all on the call, like eager. And then this guy is like late, 20 minutes on the call, or shows up at the end or doesn't even show up to the call.
Right.
And it's kind of apathetic. And that's what we mean by bringing that culture. And then also the people they hire may not be the top 120, 160K a year guy. They may be, a lower level guy that was cheaper, who's just good enough to do it, who may not even know what he's doing and causing problems on the network. You know what I mean?
To be fair, we're probably speculating. Like if we're saying things like that, we're speculating now. But really,
I have heard complaints personally from other supporting nodes of this paradigm myself, but I have not been on those calls to actually witness that myself. So is that speculation? I've just heard people say, oh, this guy doesn't know what he's doing, or this dude doesn't know what he's doing. You hear those complaints and you wonder, like, was that the operator or is that just the guy they hired? That's a valid concern.
If anybody watching would like to check that, we're now live streaming anytime those calls happen, so you can actually see who's there, when, and what they contribute.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and perspective is reality. It's just like the media cycle of anything else. If the notion is that EOS Tribe is, a Main Street mom and pop block producer, and then you've got the corporate guy who, got his degree from XYZ business school, but isn't a tech guy, and he's the guy who's calling the shot. Like, it's all, again, it's politics, it's perception. And I think that's relevant in a governance structure. So
if we thought that politics wouldn't be involved in the first governed blockchain, then we were fooling ourselves.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we're just like Kevin said, we're also a flat organization. It's just me and Eugene Lisgan, 50% incorporated in Wyoming. We'll eventually have a board structure out of Delaware to have inflows, and we probably will protect our assets in Cayman or somewhere else eventually as our rewards grow. But that's kind of, that's just smart for U.S. operators to handle that way. Sure. But we don't run other, competing businesses or anything. I have a small boutique consultancy. I don't even employ anyone W-2. I just basically am kind of moving into just consulting into this space to help people better understand it as a supporting business, because I think you guys have a similar structure for community. I believe within your structure, Kevin, another operation that handles comms for these organizations, another that handles technical, but it's all under the same operators. It's just the same three guys. So in our case, that's two guys. So.
We separated for different reasons. But yes, we do have a 3 legal entity structure that anybody is free to go view in our disclosure, which we've published.
Same for us. We published too. It was basically an ownership disclosure that was required in the Reg Producer Agreement. And there's a lot of block producers that aren't following that. If you go to eoswire.org/BP compliance, you can get that's eoswire.org/BP compliance. You can go check for yourselves on who's compliant and who's not, who's paying attention to these rules. And that's kind of where I believe internally, where this big negative discussion is starting up, because just like you said, you have this paradigm of guys who aren't in the supporting node or the top producing node, range, and they're disillusioned, they're let down, and they're looking for a way to attack or come up or get, basically get more visibility, and you can't blame them. I mean, some of them these guys are highly technical. They put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into the ecosystem, and they're not really getting the visibility or the rewards for that. So we're going to see a lot more politics and a lot more kind of upstarts and uprisings, I believe, over the next 2 or 3 months for sure. So
yeah.
Can I give a breaking news? Breaking news.
Sure. Oh boy.
Where's the news flash?
A specific pain point for the community with the recent ECAP decisions has been their lack of the absence of explanation. Most recently with the request, which actually was written as an order to freeze 27 accounts. They have heard the people, they have heard the community, and in the EOS Gov Telegram channel, they have just issued 2 PDF documents that seek to provide additional explanation as to why they ordered those 27 accounts to be frozen. So if anybody would like to see those, go to EOS Gov Telegram channel, and I'm going to tweet them out shortly so that you can see them there as well.
Cool. Very cool. All right. So one of the things that stood out to me too, I've been paying attention to the Ethereum securities discussion. Are all these things securities? Is Bitcoin a security? Is Ripple a security? And one of the things that seems to stand out as the defining feature as to why something like Ethereum would not be a security is the fact that it is proof of work. It seemed like that was kind of the linchpin of their case. Does DPoS and therefore does EOS have an issue with the federal government deciding that EOS would be a security? Is that something that you guys have discussed? Is it something you're concerned about? Does it matter?
It's purely
Go ahead.
It's a utility token. I mean, tokens are bandwidth on the network. That is literally the definition of a product or service. Like, come on,
Right.
You know what I mean? Literally, you put tokens on the network, you get bandwidth to deploy your dApp. Very simple. That would totally pass a Howey test. I'm sure they'll turn it into something different or try because of the token sale. But that's a completely other matter. The actual token itself and the tokens being produced or used are purely to make the network work and to actually stake bandwidth to actually run your dApp on the network. So I don't agree with people saying that, but I'll let Kevin give his take.
Oh, well, I was just going to say that. So at EOS New York, we have got different disciplines. The one you're asking about is not mine. And there are people that get paid a lot to figure out if something passes the Howey test or is not a security. So I'm hoping that EOS isn't. It doesn't seem like it is in my amateur opinion, but
as mine.
yeah. So I don't have the expertise to answer that question.
And I would tend to agree. I think the thing that stands out is that a holder is given something of a dividend. Like if you stake, then you receive a staking reward. So you're holding with the assumption that you will be given more. Essentially, is that the case? Or does every EOS holder get that, or just block producers?
No, not every holder gets a staking reward. I don't believe that that's accurate. I'll let Kevin.
Okay. The answer is no. So if you are staking a token, you are changing the state of the token, and you are either casting a vote, you are purchasing RAM, or you are reserving CPU and bandwidth that regenerates on a 3-day rolling average.
Okay.
Then there is the additional resource of storage, which has not been released. It's on Block One's roadmap for Q4.
And I asked Dan about that in the last meeting, and he just shrugged. He said he didn't know. So I think Bart said towards the end of the year, early next year is when they're shooting for. And that's the best that we've gotten on the file system. The EOS file system is what he's talking about, because, essentially if you start looking at this whole stack, it's kind of like Amazon, for the blockchain.
Right. Yeah, it is.
You have bandwidth, you have CPU, and those are network resources that we all use to deploy applications. So in a blockchain sense, it's decentralized applications, and you are using the token, like you said, on a, to stake for those resources to use them. So. But you don't receive any rewards. You don't receive any dividends for doing that. Only block producers receive inflation for basically signing transactions and keeping the network secure. So
and that said, there are economic models that developers have started to adopt that are the airdrop method, where just by simply holding tokens as a means of distributing the tokens for their DApp or to get the word out about it. It's also a marketing tactic. They distribute those tokens, and if they're successful, those tokens may have a fiat exchange.
That's a gift. That's not a sale. You're not selling the tokens. So, and then even the people doing that are basically setting it up in a Cayman fund or a trust on top of that. So it just adds lots of layers for our regulators to try to come in and mess with that. And I think you're seeing EOS as like the evolution, the maturity of learning from Ethereum, learning from Bitcoin, learning from all these failures. I think that Dan and a few other projects like Gen 3, Gen 4 protocols are trying to make a newer, a better way to do this stuff. So.
Yeah, no, I agree. RAM was mentioned. One of the other things that I wanted to bring up is it Chintai or Shintai?
Shintai. I'm actually the UX lead on that project. And, that's going to be a really powerful project, because you have these scenarios where as the token rises in price, $10, $20, $30 or more, at some point it may not be affordable for someone in the third world, or excuse me, the developing world, to actually be able to accumulate those tokens. So Chintai will allow you to lease tokens for a fraction of the price, more or less, to be able to acquire that RAM and CPU and bandwidth on the network. And I mean, there's a lot of different angles being discussed on how that's going to work, on like what the person, the lesser versus the lessee will receive, obviously. But some of that information is available in the Telegram group for Chintai, as far as the exact specifics of percentages and what the payout structure would be. But that's a community-led project. That's like not really owned by any one person. We're kind of stewards who are going to release it open source eventually. And the community will run that, and it will probably run through worker proposals, and there'll be an entire system to manage what happens with Chintai or not eventually.
Yeah. But RAM cannot be delegated. So I don't know if
cannot be. Okay.
RAM cannot be delegated.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that's interesting. So with Chintai, the idea is, let's say you have a $30 token, but you have somebody in, let's say they're in sub-Saharan Africa and they want to connect to the EOS system somehow. They could lease something for, let's say, $2, $3 value of a token in order to operate some DApp that they want to launch. Is that the idea?
Yeah, more or less. I mean, like Kevin said, not RAM, but CPU and bandwidth, on the network.
Okay. Well, and I don't actually understand the specific mechanism that will allow the leasing of the token. So maybe, I don't know. I know that you can delegate bandwidth and CPU, but delegating may not be
RAM.
Right, but delegating may not be what Chintai is actually doing. They may be doing something.
It's more of a relay, as I understand the technical side of it. But again, I don't develop the back end. I'm really developing the interface. So, I mean, that's a question for Michael, who's a part of that group, and probably David Packham, to give you more specifics on exactly, how that aspect or that layer, because it's always changing too. Things have changed in the system. There was going to be, in the earlier specification that Rick worked on, a delegation of RAM, but then it was found out that couldn't be done. So went to purely CPU and bandwidth, and eventually possibly the file system itself. So when that's released, so that will be ever evolving, and it's really hard at this phase to like pin down an exact. No, it's going to empirically work this way every time, because the system itself is changing.
There's something that you mentioned that I think is a very nuanced detail that I wanted to point out, which was the assumption that if the token price increases, then the network remains static. The idea is that we have a clear path to scaling, and block producers are the ones responsible for scaling the network, and it is their responsibility to be very literally monitoring the token to ensure that we are scaling at a rate commensurate with the rate the price of the token increases, so that because when you own tokens, you are insulated from the effects of price volatility. It doesn't matter what the price is today or tomorrow. You are reserved the exact same amount of resources on the network that you were prior. But it's when you draw a line in time where somebody decides to become a token holder after a price increase or decrease. We need to make sure that we are keeping it affordable as block producers. That's why we take these block rewards and we reinvest it back into our own infrastructure.
Yeah, exactly.
And then through side chain scaling and everything like that. But we don't want to assume that it's static over time.
Right. Cool. Good answer. Very thorough.
We actually wrote, it was one of the first things we wrote about. If you check it out on our Steam, it's a series called Your Vote Matters. It was Your Vote Matters #1. Why choosing good block producers is important, so they reinvest back in their own infrastructure.
Yeah,
and thank you for listing us, because we appreciate it. We actually probably have the third or fourth most bare metal co-location, and I know that's other block producers get mad when we use that as a selling point, but we're totally in colo. We only use a mix of DigitalOcean, Linode, and AWS for load balancing in rotation. So if any one of them shut us down, but we're all bare metal. And a co-location in Wyoming. Our actual producing node is in Wyoming, and we've got our specifications up on our announcement post. And it's like 750 gigs of RAM. We can't use that right now. I think it's like 32 gigs of RAM to start, but we can immediately scale up for probably the next year based on what we have now. It's suspected that's going to be about a terabyte of RAM total. Eventually is going to be like the minimum very quickly. But I mean, to expand on Kevin's point, that is going to be a very touchy subject, because if you don't, then you have like RAM, a lot of problems that could cause if people are not reinvesting and there's a shortage of RAM on the network. Right. So that's, that is good block producers are already at least making steps, you know what I mean? And prepared to make steps to expand that as needed. And I agree with Kevin to not, go out. I happen to have a really big node that I built, a few servers that I built for big data back a few years ago, and that's what we used. I wasn't doing it just for a sales point, but most of the serious block producers are aggressively investing, in that stuff and taking that very seriously. So.
Well, that was one of the things Eugene, when I talked to Eugene last week, he said the same thing. Like, there are people that just have a bunch of AWS nodes, that kind of thing.
It's not very decentralized,
No, and that was exactly my point. Is like, well, what's to stop some millionaire or billionaire from just buying a bunch of AWS space and turning himself into this ace block producer and not really having any overhead, that kind of thing. So,
and yet there are EOS New York is using multiple cloud providers right now, and our head of technology is getting on a plane in 2 weeks to go scope out our data center. Yeah. But the counter argument to that is there are people now sitting with $500,000 worth of debt because they thought they were going to be in the top 21, and now they aren't. So that wasn't very prudent entrepreneurialism on their part. But there are benefits to having a cloud scaling. Cloud infrastructure
hybrid,
right now.
Yeah, hybrid is really technically, to those who understand infrastructure, a hybrid is usually best because you're not guaranteed that bare metal server you have won't fail itself. And then what are you doing? So you have to have redundancy. You guys were attacked on that, like low key attacked on that, and I thought that was the biggest BS that I've seen. I don't care what other. I mean, it's complete garbage.
Propaganda campaign.
Yeah, dude. Come on, man. Hybrid technically is the best. We use hybrid. You guys use hybrid. There's nothing wrong with that, but you of course don't want to be too much one way or the other. So.
If in a couple of years from now somebody has been relying on cloud-only infrastructure for that entire time, they've probably been doing themselves and the network a disservice. It is cheaper as a business owner. It's cheaper to own. There's a higher upfront cost for the bare metal, and then it's cheaper to maintain over time. But also you have more control over it. There's benefits to both, but it's not to demonize one or the other at this stage is silly because.
Right.
We're producing blocks. There's no problem. And I can't actually articulate really great arguments on this because I'm not our head of technology, and Steve is much more well versed in the technology than I am.
Yeah.
I mean, to some extent, I'm in the middle. I'm not nowhere near Eugene and any level, but I would say that Kevin has studied and been closer to areas and nuances of governance, him and Rick. So no one person can do it all. And in that way, a lot of us block producers need each other. We really do, to like figure it all out and to make sure we're making the best decisions. And at the same time, to do that, like Kevin said, the most transparent, like public way. A lot of the times that we do these interviews is also so we can talk to each other, but it's like no kind of, private conversations. We're having an open dialogue about things that we think. I have a show, The State, that I do that on for that reason. So anything that we talked about as a community is out there for people. There's no collusion. There's no backdoor deals. Like, we want to clean that up with EOS. Like, we agree that that's a problem in general. And a lot of crypto people consolidate and they collude. That's what they do. Right. I mean, like, you can see it in the buying, and the price action. So, one of the things that we can do as a community to quell that is to be like overly transparent. Like, every single conversation we have, everything that we do, short of, hey, how your kids are doing, that kind of stuff, no big deal. Right. But any kind of like anything that relates to the network, decisions or opinions that could affect the network should completely be public. And EOS New York, and they've led the charge for that. We've tried to be stewards and be really aggressive with that as well as other block producers. EOS 42 does a good job of that. And I think that that's probably the next phase of discussion in the space is people, as they start to figure out how it works, they're going to want accountability. So what he pointed out with ECAP is just one example of like a whole cottage industry that's going to start popping up that needs to be, very forthcoming with what they're working on. There needs to be competition for that. And we need the token holders' feedback to do it the right way. We don't claim to have it all figured out,
Sure. All right. Another technical question. So one of the other pieces of unfortunate stuff that's happened in the last 7 days is there was the DDoS.
That was not a DDoS attack.
It was not a DDoS. Can you clarify? Because that's kind of that's what's spinning around.
EOS UK tweeted out that it was a DDoS attack, which was premature and incorrect. What actually happened was there was an issue with the way deferred transactions were handled, in that a deferred transaction happened at the wrong time under the wrong circumstance on the software, and it essentially caused a break in consensus. And the software throws on an emergency brake when that happens.
So it doesn't fork,
Exactly, to prevent a hard fork. Because if we have a hard fork that is unexpected, now people are transacting on two different chains, and we got to go back and say, oh my God, how do we converge back on one chain? Instead, EOS goes, throw on the brakes. And it was a really amazing process to be a part of. I woke up at 6 a.m. and somebody in the Telegram channel had said, like, what is happening? What is going on? It was a block producer channel.
Right.
And we immediately all jumped on a call, and within 5 hours, we had isolated the problem with Block 1, issued a patch, in real time, updated what happened, and translated it into both Chinese and Korean, and distributed it and been live.
Yeah, so that's how it was supposed to work. I mean, it's supposed to work that way. Like it halted. That's a feature. That wasn't like a bug or an attack. So
sure.
Now, it's not great that there's a bug. Right? This is a $10 billion network. We want to be reasonably certain that it's going to continue to run all the time. But it didn't, and we were able to fix it very quickly. Mm-hmm. So we will continue to iterate on that process should it ever happen again.
What was the fix? Was it a simple software patch, or how crazy of a scramble was it?
It's 3 lines of code.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's available if anybody would like to see it on. There was a statement that was put out by a number of block producers. It's on our Medium account, which we used Medium instead of Steam it because you can't like update Steam as easily. It's the GitHub pull request is linked in our statement.
We had a post about that I felt like, and I will admit, publicly here today that I think that our disdain was more of the indecision. That kind of went on around it was what concerned, there's someone actually said in the meeting something to the effect of, I have to ask my boss Monday. I'm serious.
Yeah.
I mean, that's Dublin and
Eugene
said, you said that you had missed that, Kevin, or that was at the tail end of the meeting that you weren't on, but Dublin and both Eugene had said to me that why do they have to ask their boss? Like,
that was the ECAP call. Not the call where we were figuring out the chain.
The actual bug. Okay.
Yeah. I know what you're talking about, though.
Cool.
Interesting. Wow. Okay. a lot of moving parts.
I'm telling you, man. Like, it's like at least 10 different groups and of stuff going on all at the same time, and you may get it confused. Oh, that call, it's like
right. Well, and that's the complicated thing, it's a governance structure.
It's complicated for us. How complicated is it for the token holders, right? So.
And that's exactly what it is. I've got a community of 50,000 people on Facebook, and I have one partner and we have 4 mods. And the amount of questions we've had about EOS and, oh my gosh, is EOS going to go belly up? Was this whole thing a scam? That, like this seems really disorganized. And, I go back and forth myself. Well, sure. And I get that. Like, as somebody who does business in the space and understands this kind of thing, like, well, guys, give them a couple of weeks. Like, for whatever reason, token holders are the least patient people in the history of the universe. But
I would say go research block producers, find ones that you like, vote for them, or vote for whomever. And then when you have questions, go to them. And if they can't answer, find ones that will.
Right. Well, right. And that's the beauty of a real democracy right there, is that, when you have that kind of direct influence and who your representative is, that kind of thing, like, obviously that works well. However, I don't know how many people are buying EOS who even understand what the heck it's supposed to do. The amateur investor, the retail investor, the kind of people that, I try to help coach on this kind of stuff, they're difficult to have that conversation with. They don't know what any of this is. They don't use it as
that's all of our problem, right? That's not EOS'
for sure.
problem. It's a new technology, and there's a lot of money in it, and so people are going to get in it when they may not fully understand. I mean,
sure,
that's everyone's problem.
Is there a great resource somewhere that you can recommend for somebody to like is there a 3 to 5 minute video that gives like the right version of what EOS is? Does something like that exist?
There's this long post by Sonata Systems. It's like it's a huge wall of text where it's just everything in there.
Sure.
I will try to find the link and send it to you afterwards.
Please do. I'd appreciate it, because I want people. I'm the fundamental analysis guy. So for me, I get everybody asking me, "Hey, Kurt, what do you think of, shitcoin A versus shitcoin B?" And I have to have this conversation every day as to, well, here's why this is worthless and redundant versus, oh, here's why this may actually be a use case that has value. And it's just a giant pain in the butt for somebody that is honestly disengaged. Like they look at it as a way to extract fiat, like, these are just crazy stocks or something, and that's where the conversation goes. So
it goes back. It's an exchange culture. That's and if you look at how we're going to start to move away from tokens being a purely speculative vehicle, because they will actually provide some utility. If looking at now what the challenges that exchanges are having, because the people are like, my tokens can do things on EOS, and I would like to access those things.
Right.
I'm with you, exchange. Are you going to let me access them? And they're like, I don't think we know how. So they got to figure that out. It's not just trading anymore. These tokens will do the things that the industry has been promising for a decade.
Yeah.
And what Kevin just said there, Rodrigo from EOS Detroit articulated very well in one of the first really good presentations in the ecosystem. And we're moving away from speculative markets to utility-based markets. And that's the very concise. He always distills this kind of stuff. I got a lot of love for Rodrigo. Shout out, Rodrigo.
Cool. So speaking of a decade of maybe partially broken promises, can I get what's your 2-minute feedback on Bitcoin? What's your opinion of Bitcoin at this time?
AOL? AOL? Is it AOL or is it Amazon, right? Maybe Amazon. Maybe an incredible store of value. It may, a lot of the academics, at Stanford are looking at it using graphene to actually improve, Bitcoin's throughput, which is Dan's invention. Yeah. So, I think a lot of people are kind of just waking up to who Dan Larimer really is and what he's about. And you have to understand, he was arguing with Satoshi himself about, this is stupid. Like, why are we wasting all this electricity just to come to consensus? Like, there's more elegant ways to do this. And then later, most recently, came out and said, you know what? They're just different ways to solve different problems. Sometimes you need permissionless systems to do certain things because of extreme censorship or things that just, can't be overcome with a permission system. So, I think that any Bitcoin, Ethereum, or EOS fanboys out there, and it's the same thing I said on Richard Hart's show, we need to just open up a dialogue and realize that we all have a part to play in that. All the purists and maximalists, all the Ethereum, EOS fanboys, that they're just different approaches to solve different problems. And that if we were really smart as a movement, we would be supporting each other and helping each other thrive, because we need all of this and all of our smarts and all of the computer science up to this point, and the great innovations to kind of make this thing work. And if you're out there and you're an EOS hater, but you're a hardcore maximalist, you're missing the whole point. If you're an Ethereum fanboy and you hate Bitcoin, you think it's outdated and EOS is stupid, you're missing the point. And if you're an EOS purist, that's or idealist that thinks that all of those other coins have had their day and now it's our time, you're wrong. They're going to be here for a long time to come. And we do a service to the larger ecosystem of crypto to have a better understanding for each other and a better dialogue. And that's my take. So.
I agree. What do you think, Kevin?
Oh, I don't think we need. I would love for everyone to get along, but I don't think we actually need to, because it's all open source. So the smart people will take the tech that works, they'll iterate on it, and then everyone else that wants to dig in, entrench themselves, they'll get left behind. But for Bitcoin, Bitcoin gave us blockchain. It's just the first use case of it. Mm-hmm. That's the most important thing about Bitcoin, is that it gave us blockchain, which is it's going to be a fundamental technology. Right. It's not Uber that disrupts overnight. It's going to slowly weave its way into everything. Right. And we have only just begun trying to figure out how to have this value transfer conversation peer to peer, and the ways that can be used.
It's just a new protocol, guys. Did you, if you told somebody back when TPS came out that enabled email or HTTP, oh my God, this is going to change, that's what a lot of people said. And it bumped up the world and changed it in a lot of brilliant, significant ways. But, it's going to be much the same, this store of value, this transfer of value process that's secure, it's immutable. It's just a new protocol. Ultimately. And it's going to enable and facilitate a lot of new technology that, will transform the world. Is it going to be what the idealists say? Is it going to be what the academics say? Is it going to be what the naysayers say? It'll probably be somewhere in the middle, just like the last set of protocols. You know what I mean?
For sure.
It's just be pragmatic, be centrist, look at the data and don't flip out, guys. It'll be okay.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So what does absolute victory look like? If you guys have like a $10,000 bottle of wine or something on the shelf, what is the EOS event that occurs that allows you to bust out that bottle of wine and say, okay, we did it. We finally have achieved what it is we've been working toward.
People are interacting with the EOS blockchain without even knowing it.
Couldn't have said it any better myself.
Beautiful. Love it. And then we're getting last 5 minutes here. What's the biggest misconception about EOS that you wish you could change? If you had absolute power to get into the heads of everyone involved and change one thing, what would it be?
Go ahead, Kevin. You have been taking a beating on this, dude. Oh my, I got a piece of it and I'm half crazy. He has been taking, New York's one of the most visible people in the space, so internationally, so they beat him down from an international level. He's doing 12, 16 hours a day and Telegram sometimes, and I will defer that to him.
That's such a hard question to pick one. Can just say it again, jog my brain.
If you could change one, I'll give you 3. If you could change 3 misconceptions about EOS, if you could reach into the minds of your greatest critics and just clear them up so that they don't ever come back again, what would they be?
Well, I'll just try to pick one. I think this would be the easiest question to. I've been answering questions professionally for 6 months. No, longer than that. I would say it's I don't even know. Steve, go ahead.
I mean, the three main things would be that, that to people that say that EOS is a scam, first of all, do your history on Dan Larimer and the people involved in this project. And I mean, I'm dead serious about that. Look at go back to the Bitcoin, the same purists that allow that to happen, understand the paradigm between mining culture and the people who have vested interests in that and the money they have and what Dan and his ideas represent. And you can very quickly realize, oh, wow, this is just dark PR. These guys are just got trolls, for real, dead serious. They have been dogging him out for 10 years. And have never let up on it. And Dan is one of the nicest, most sincere libertarians that has nothing but the best intentions to create systems that enable, as he says, life, liberty, and property. That is his life's work. And I wouldn't doubt it when he's 50, 60, if he ends up winning a Nobel Peace Prize for what he has done. And I mean that. You think it's funny now, but remember, on this show, I said that.
Right. Two, no, I agree, actually. I like Dan.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's not what you think. He just looks, just like Vitalik. He's a genius, and he comes off quirky and a little eccentric. Imagine that, an intelligent, highly intelligent person coming off a little, strange to people who may not understand it. Two, to extend on that too, I would say the wallet distribution. Those are exchanges that are providing liquidity pools that are actually individual token holders. The 70% are all these wallets is complete garbage. EOS doesn't have a wallet now. It's just getting wallets that are trusted. So of course they're all on exchanges. I mean, wake up. Good Lord. Anybody that says that is a moron. I mean, straight up. If you are not smart enough to go know the difference of that and you're pumping that out, you're an idiot. Straight up. I mean, I'll say it. You are just not, you shouldn't be in crypto. You shouldn't be talking about crypto if you do not fundamentally understand that. Feel ashamed if you say that publicly because you look like a moron. You really do. To anybody who's even looked into it for a few months knows that. If you are saying and disseminating that, sorry, you need to go right.
Sure.
So I'm just saying that's what it is, dude. Straight up. So the third, not saying that there aren't a few whales, there might be 20, 30% of the token supply held up in a 8 or 9 consortium of whales, but not in any way, form or fashion, 70, 80% of the supply is owned by these whales. That's just complete garbage. The other thing, the final thing I would touch on is just, for people to have a culture like they do in other chains, to research. You go over in Ethereum, they're highly intelligent comp sci people who will actually research a debate and come with at least a structured kind of okay, I've looked into the issues and I think that this is where you're failing, and they'll come with an intelligent debate. But in a lot of the Bitcoin camps, they don't even do any research. They just literally go read a piece and go, Win Moon, you guys suck. And it's I mean, look at it's not cool. It's at least allow us the same that you would, did we complain when you guys were forking in every direction, for 8 months straight? Did we complain when the miners were, tied up in 3 consortiums and then you guys are saying we're centralized, but it's the same 3 mining pools that pretty much dominate Ethereum and Bitcoin? Just hold yourselves to the same arguments and just afford us time to stumble as a community. We know it's not perfect. I will say that openly. And if you talk to us, we're super approachable. Like the guys that you could have a beer with at the bar, we'll totally admit if it sucks. We'll listen to you. And we'll actually go back and probably make it better, and give us that at this phase, So that's
we've actually spent a lot of time saying that it's not perfect, and I've said it. But we're talking about the governance aspect of it. The technology, we've already achieved about 600 transactions per second, which is 20, 30 times that of Ethereum. So there you go. Already. It's working very well. But I did finally think of one. And it is that the misconception that decentralization is a goal in and of itself and not a means to an end. Decentralization is a means to an end. And immediately when you look at EOS, you would say, oh, there are 21 validators? That's centralized. No, I would say that EOS is not hyper decentralized as it is in proof of work systems, despite then in reality seeing the convergence of hash power onto a few different groups. But and then you go into the actual incentive behavioral economics of what a block producer is and all the standby nodes and how they work together, but also compete, that kind of thing. But to actually achieve meaningful results in decentralized application development and deployment, you need to have a low latency, high throughput network, which would not be technically feasible using hyper decentralization as it is deployed on proof of work networks. So don't confuse decentralization as the grail, because it's not. It's getting stuff done. That's the grail. And the degree of decentralization that you use to get there is just a means to an end.
Absolutely.
Beautiful.
I completely agree.
I got a couple of quick questions. I got people pinging me. Is the 911 help thing going to continue going forward?
They're going to continue. Future? They're going to continue collecting information. Whether or not they have thought about how this process is going to be sustained, I don't know. EOS 42 was the awesome block producer that took it upon themselves to create this. They didn't ask anybody. They just said, people need help, and they got together.
Cool.
Liam led the charge on that. He did a great job. So props, Liam.
Yes. But they have now uniquely positioned this place as an arbitrage for this. Is that the right word when you're in a hospital and you got to like delegate how bad things are? But yeah,
triage.
Triage. Thank you. Arbitrage is the currency exchange thing. Okay.
Yeah.
So it is a triage center. And probably will continue to fulfill that role until such time ECAP or arbitration can have processes where they onboard people.
Sure.
But the distinction is whether the group will probably continue, but will their intended effect of being able to prevent the theft of property on EOS continue? That's up to ECAP, how they process those claims, how they communicate them out transparently to both the community and the block producer. Can we have those claims on chain? So two different things. The group will probably continue. Yes.
Cool. What is the typical resource that you would expect an average DApp to require? Is that something that's even calculable at this point?
Great question, because that's every single developer is asked, like, how much was it going to cost to build my DApp. So in normal software development, you're going to have an idea of the amount of resources that you require. We just built a tool called the EOS Resource Planner, which is eosrp.io, where you can take the current value of the token and figure out what is the real world cost of these resources, including RAM. And we're actually, we're making the RAM a little more exact because the Bancor algorithm that powers it is pretty complicated, but we're close to figuring it out. So you can estimate the cost there, but you need to know as a developer how much resource you need. We'll just tell you how many EOS you need to get at that.
And Kevin, at current prices, it looks like it's close to what Dan had kind of said initially, that it's a half or a third of what Amazon would cost in terms of price. Is that accurate, or am I off by that statement?
It's going to be more expensive than AWS, for example, because one, you're paying a premium for blockchain services, okay? And the second thing
he was talking about when it scaled out, it would be significantly cheaper, but at current time, it's more expensive than Amazon.
Well, also, not everything that you're going to be doing is going to be on chain. If you're hosting a decentralized YouTube, you're going to have accounts on chain. You're going to have your token if you have one on chain, and those are just entries in a ledger. But the video files that you have are going to be stored somewhere else. And so, in that way, it's not really a fair comparison. Where AWS, you have everything, and then EOS, you have some things. But it will be the responsibility of block producers to be able to monitor those things to make sure that they're still affordable and that we scale out appropriately to make sure that they remain so.
Sure. Cool. Is there anything I've missed, or is there anything you'd like to just sort of if I give you carte blanche and let you, give shout outs or whatever it is you want to do to wrap up on your end?
Vote for EOS Tribe. EOS Tribe, PROD, at the eosportal.io or your preferred voting place. Vote us in. We're an independent block producer. We need to move up the chain and help these guys. Eugene needs to get back in the mix and make sure the chain's secure. So,
sure.
I would say keep being involved, and one of those ways is voting. And if you do wonder who to vote for, and it seems like a daunting task, knowing that you can vote for up to 30, a number of block producers have put together lists of the other groups that we've seen in the space that are doing a bang up job. EOS Tribe is one of them. They're on our list. You can
well,
find
the
that
ninth
list on
most mentioned block producer, the ninth most in the entire ecosystem. BitSpace put that out, and go look at that list. Go look at BitSpace list. They're another good block producer. Go look at what the wisdom of the crowd. And look at who, not just my list, not just Kevin's list, but go look at that BitSpace list, and I'll go into your group and provide a link to it. But they basically sourced all the different lists from the entire ecosystem, all of them, all like 40 or 50 of them. And then they ranked who was mentioned in all those lists. And we were number 9. Sure. BitSpace was number 10. I think EOS New York was like number 1 or 2. And, if you don't know who, to Kevin's point, go look at the meta list for the list. If you can't find all, if you can't discern that, and go with the wisdom of the crowd.
To finish it off, the thing I would say is continue to demand total and complete transparency from your block producers. Block producers should be terrified of token holders, and our job should not be easy. And it's your job to make our job not easy. So to continue to demand accountability, transparency, and excellence.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. Well, thanks so much, guys. I really appreciate it. I do these shows. I want to have high-level dialogue. I want to give you guys the opportunity to talk about what matters to you. I want our community to think about coins more fundamentally. That's the whole point of CoinCast and spending an hour and a half in this case to go over why this matters, what the end goal is, that kind of thing. Like, trading is only valuable if the tokens have value, if the end goal has value. So I've always believed that value derives specifically from utility. And I think that's the thing that I have the most in common with everyone in the EOS community who I've met is that's the discussion, rather than people talking about Bitcoin and price and but the technical analysis and all
Kurt,
that. Yeah.
Can I say one more thing? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I see the face you made. He's got something.
it was only the last thing I want to say is, because you're right. It's like, what do these tokens actually do? Go build something on EOS.
Yes.
Go develop something on EOS. EOS is only as valuable as what we build on top of it. So go build something cool.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Amen to that. So again, thank you guys. I appreciate you taking an hour and a half out of your Friday, and good luck, you guys. I know you've had rough weeks. I hope things chill out at least a little bit, so you can get into a groove of doing things well without taking heat from all directions. And I
sent you the Sonata Systems link. That's just this like compendium of
Please.
EOS. No, it's in the chat right now.
Oh, okay, great, love it. I'll digest it. I'll send it out to our community and let them know. So this has been CoinCast, everybody. Thank you for watching live. You can watch the replay on YouTube as soon. I think it probably takes a couple of minutes to render, but it will be back up live on YouTube, reshared throughout all of the Crypto Traders universe. You can find us at CryptoTradersPro.com, as well as all over social media. We're on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, and Medium, and Steemit. So look for us, everybody. Thank you, and goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.
Take it easy, guys.